Well, it'd be a good day for a Father's Day lesson, would it? And that's not where I'm going with this lesson this morning, but we were studying in Sunday school, where it says, "Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord." That ought to be every father's memory verse, shouldn't it? Provoke not your children to wrath. That doesn't mean just don't pester them and tease them. You know, sometimes fathers entertain themselves by just teasing these little children. Look, I've seen grandfathers do that, and they'll just, until they just get so angry with them, and that's kind of a play. That's not really what that's talking about. I tell you how you provoke your children to wrath. You provoke your children to wrath when you're not good to their mother. You provoke your children to wrath when you don't have time for them while they're growing up. You provoke your children to wrath when you think that God's stuff, that I'll just leave that up to the women. It says, fathers, bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. You want to see these young people out here that are walking around and they're just angry. They got their heads down. They're not making good use of their life. Why are they so angry? Okay, where has father been? And so neglecting those children, particularly their spiritual needs, can provoke children to wrath. So let's don't do that. And what a good bunch of fathers I see when I'm around. I mean, we're around some good fathers, and you see some good fathers and model your own fatherhood after those good fathers. And so that'll be my Father's Day lesson. What I want to do, I want to get to this lesson about Christ this morning. Coming from the book of Matthew, should we give tribute unto Caesar or not? That's the question that they ask Jesus while he is in the temple. And we'll look at that story again. But always remember, when you are reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, remember the purpose for which they wrote. There are a lot of good lessons and good teaching through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But that is a sub-purpose to the main purpose. And I'm going to go over that tonight. I've been talking Sunday nights about reading through the Bible. And tonight I'm going to talk about what to expect when you read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And here's the point, the reason those books are written, so that we might believe that Jesus is the Christ. Matthew is giving us the evidence that Jesus is the Christ. Matthew's a believer, and it's in Matthew, the Holy Spirit told Matthew to do this. So Matthew, you write down why it is that you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And that's what you have in the book of Matthew. It's his testimony. Now everything that he writes is not by itself proof. It's the accumulated evidence of all that he writes that provides that evidence there. But just think about a man that says he is the Son of God, that he is the promised Messiah. What would you expect out of that man? Well, I would expect a man that would know how to handle himself in controversy, wouldn't you? That could take the pressure and we'd be able to think clearly. I'd expect a man that had very high, elevated teachings that were above the common teachings of men. I'd expect a man of great character. And I'd expect to find a man that could look and see what was in the heart of his fellow man. And so Jesus meets all those expectations. So we're going to learn some things in this story. But if we miss that point, if we miss this, we've missed the main reason that Matthew has included this in the book that he wrote. Because he wants us to know that Jesus is the Christ. Let's read the story and think about who Jesus is. Now we're going to talk about what he said and the depths of that. But first read it just thinking about who Jesus is that is doing this. Then went the Pharisees and took counsel how they might entangle him in his talk. And they sent out unto him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, Master, we know thou art true, and teachest the way of God in truth. Neither carest thou for any man, for thou regardest not the person of men. Tell us therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, Why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Show me the tribute money. And they brought unto him a penny. And he said unto them, Whose is this image and subscription? And they said unto him, Caesar's. Then saith he unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. When they heard these words, they marveled and left him and went their way. Now, the people that were coming to him, the Pharisees, they're the ones that are coming to him. There's Pharisees, and we read about Herodians here. Understand, when Jesus came into Israel at that time, there were all these different factions among the people. And the Pharisees was their own faction. One thing about the Pharisees, they did not like Roman rule. Now, they were not as radical as another faction called the Zealots. The Zealots were actively looking for a way to get Israel's independence from Rome. See, that was their zeal. Now, the Pharisees hadn't gone that far, but they did not like the fact that Rome ruled Israel and ruled in Jerusalem. Now, the Herodians, those were Jews, but the Herodians had made peace with this. In fact, they were great supporters of the family of Herod. And so you've got two political extremes here. And they're both coming against Jesus. There's an old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that's what's happening here. But let me tell you about Jesus, the controversy that Jesus had with the Pharisees and the Herodians and the Zealots and any other group. It wasn't political. You don't read a lot about the politics of Jesus. If they'd have had Republicans and Democrats and independents in the day of Christ, you wouldn't have been able to zero in and say, well, I think Jesus is this political party. Because Jesus wasn't about politics. His kingdom was not of this world. The difference Jesus had with them was religious and spiritual. But now the Pharisees had already decided they wanted to put Jesus to death. And really, under Roman rule, you just couldn't put people to death because of religious differences. Why, there are all kinds of religious differences out there in the land, and you wouldn't put people to death for that. So they needed to entangle him in their talk and get him crossed up somehow politically with the leaders. And one of the ways to do this is bring up this idea about taxes. Now, they would accuse Jesus before Pilate a little later of saying that Jesus said we don't have to pay our taxes. That was an accusation to say, see, he's raising a rebellion against Israel. They led him into Pilate and began to accuse him, saying, we found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ the King. Well, that is just part of their lies. All Jesus ever taught was to pay your taxes. In fact, remember how he paid the temple tax himself. And his parents, the reason he was born in Jerusalem was they were taking a census for tax purposes. And so Mary and Joseph, see, they were taxpayers. And he was born to a family of taxpayers. And that was never an issue with Jesus. Now, it was an issue among the Jews, the Pharisees, and the Herodians. It's like I say, Jesus didn't come here to solve all these political issues. That his purpose was greater than that. Well, there were among Jesus' disciples, some of them were zealots, and some of them were publicans. Well, Matthew himself was a publican, a tax collector. The gospel Jesus taught transcended all their political squabblings. And there was room for them in the kingdom of heaven. So, they took counsel how they might entangle him in his talk. That word entangle is a word that would be used to think about how to trap birds. That they'd hang a great net out and then spoof the birds so they'd fly in and get tangled up in that net. And so they would trap them. Okay, that's what they're going to do for Jesus. Let's set a trap for him. He's in the temple talking before the people. Let's lay the trap. What we will do, we'll get our disciples to go out there. You see, these disciples of the Pharisees, this wasn't the Pharisees themselves. These would be their younger disciples. They said, we can go to the Pharisees and they'll pretend that they are really sincere seekers of the truth. It'll be easier for them to do that than for us. He knows us. And what does that tell about them? They're not sincere seekers of the truth, are they? And their disciples had picked up on their hypocrisy very well, as you'll see. But sometimes people act like, oh, I'm very sincere. And I have been fooled by that. And I bet you have been fooled by that. People pretending to be sincere when they are hypocrites. Well, take the Herodians. We'll send our disciples, they'll pretend to be these innocent, sincere seekers of truth. Bring the Herodians along, because listen, when they testify at Jesus' trial, when those known to be the Herodians testify at his trial that he said don't pay your taxes, why, then that'll be good, strong testimony. So we'll set him up before these witnesses, and we'll have whereof we can accuse him of something where we can put him to death. Now, they started off with flattery. Oh, how many people have fallen for flattery? It just put themselves off guard. So now here are these disciples pretending to be sincere seekers of God. Look how they lay it on thick when they come to Jesus. And they say, Master, that's a very complimentary term for a teacher. Say, Master, says, we know thou art true, and teachest the way of God in truth. Neither carest thou for any man, for thou regardest not the person of man. See how they're just laying it on thick, flattering him? Let me tell you something. Everything they said about Jesus there was true. But none of that was true when it came to the Pharisees. You couldn't have said that about the Pharisees. Now, you could say that about Jesus. They were flattering him. And see, they're trying to entangle him in his talk. You associate flattery with entanglement, and it reminded me of a verse in Proverbs 29:5. A man that flatters his neighbor spreadeth a net for his feet. Now, we all fall prey to that. Don't we love it? Have people say all kind of nice, good things to us, and they can catch us off guard by doing that. So beware the flatterer. Compliments are genuine and appreciated and helpful. But flattery, boy, that can come disguised as compliments, see? And they can ensnare you. Now, they ask a loaded question. Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? Think about that. Here he is with the people around, and the people are divided over this. And the Messiah they expected was not a spiritual Messiah anyway. They were expecting a Messiah to show up and throw off Roman rule and have a people ruled by God's law like it was in the days of David the king. And so if you're paying tribute unto Caesar, that would show that you're not going to do that, doesn't it? So they were hoping to expose him as a false Messiah. They didn't understand the spiritual nature of his kingdom. But what if he said no? No, don't pay tribute to Caesar. Well, they had the Herodians right there, see? And then when they accused him of that, they'd have those witnesses, and they could accuse him of trying to raise treason against Caesar. So there's their trap, and they ask a loaded question, a politically loaded question, to see how they can entrap him in his response. I'm reminded of Psalm chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together. Here they are, they've plotted all this up, they've laid this plat, they've put the flattery down there, they've asked the loaded question. And he that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. It's like you've heard of softball questions. You know, that's kind of a media term where they just, this is easy. This is not even difficult for Jesus to deal with. And notice how effectively he's going to deal with this. He says, he perceived their wickedness and said, why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Can just imagine that now. He already knew what was up. And he knew their hearts. They could pretend to be sincere, but he knew it was pretense. He knew they were wicked. And so he called them hypocrites to their faces. And then he said this, show me the tribute money. And they brought him a penny. And he said unto them, whose image and subscription? Now, the tribute money. The particular tax this is talking about was what we'd call a poll tax. Talking about your head is your poll. And so everybody pays this tax is what it is. Everybody has to pay this. And you pay it in this coin. It wasn't just you didn't write a check or something or pay it in grain or that. There was a certain coin that you had to pay this tax with. That was the tribute money. It's called here a penny. There's actually another name for it in the Greek. But you can think of our own penny and kind of think of it in that manner. Just a little coin that had an image and a subscription on there. Notice, the image and subscription. I don't want to overlook that subscription. Archaeologists, every now and then, come up with that. They're scattered all over the old Roman Empire. You know how people drop their pennies? Well, people are always coming up with these old coins in their diggings that was a common coin. And here it is. There's an image. You see the image on there? It's kind of like the little image on our penny. Only this is the image of the reigning Caesar, Tiberius Caesar. And the subscription, you probably can't read that Latin around there, and even if you know Latin, it's a little hard to read what's on there. But here's what the subscription says. Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. Now wait a minute. Augustus was not divine. The Jews knew that Augustus was not divine. These Caesars tried to set themselves up as descendants of the gods. That's what they're trying to do. And show that they are a little deity themselves. In fact, there is even a cult of Caesar worshipers. And it got worse as the Caesars went on. They expected more and more worship to them. Augustus was not divine, and the Jews knew it. And that's one of the reasons they hated paying this tax with this penny. Well, they had commandments. The 10 commandments, the first two, Exodus 20, 3 through 4. Thou shalt have no other God before me. Exodus 20 and verse 4, that's 3. 4, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. So they look at this penny, and they say, there's a graven image. And they're saying Augustus is divine. And that was hard on those Jews to have to take that penny and pay that tax. Nevertheless, here's what Jesus said. Render therefore unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. See, Jesus understood something that they did not seem to understand. And it's something a lot of people today still struggle with and don't understand. And that is, there is a difference between the governments of men in the kingdom of heaven. And sometimes people try to set up some kind of thing. So, well, you've either got to choose. You're either going to be a citizen of the kingdom of this world, or you got to be a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. You've either got to honor the government, or you've got to honor God, as though there's a choice there you've got to make. Jesus, no, that you don't have to make that choice between the two, because they're complementary. Well, God ordained both, as we're going to see here in this lesson. It'd be like saying, well, are you going to obey your parents, or are you going to obey God? Well, you shouldn't have to make that choice. Because your parents, there's a role for parents to tell you what to do, and then there's God tells you what to do. It's not a matter of making a choice. Now we know if your parents tell you to do something that's wrong, you got to do what's right. But it's not a false choice to be made here, and that's what they laid before Christ. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar, and to God the things that are God's. The fact that Jesus made reference to the subscription, and that it says that Augustus is divine, that's enough to show that Jesus did not implicitly approve everything that governments do. But the idea of civil government he did approve of, and there's a difference there, you see. Look, in Luke 13, 31 through 33, Jesus is preaching, and they come to him and says, now, I tell you what, Herod says, you better not do it. He's going to come out here and stop you from doing that. Herod is not going to stop God from preaching to his own people. That is an abuse of government. The same day there came certain Pharisees saying, get thee out and depart thence, for Herod will kill thee. He said unto him, go ye and tell that fox, behold, I cast out devils, and I do curse today and tomorrow and the third day, and I shall be perfected. Nevertheless, I must walk today and tomorrow and the day following. Herod's not going to tell me what to do. When it comes to preaching and going about my work as the Son of God, you see, that's government abuse. Now, God never approves of government abuse. And the apostles taught we ought to obey God rather than man. But that's not to say God doesn't approve of government. That's the abuse. And God does approve of government. Look at these passages. Romans 13, 1 through 7. Let every soul be subject to the higher powers. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whoso therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror of good works, but of evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good. Thou shalt have praise of the same, for he's a minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he's a minister of God, a revenger, to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Therefore, ye must needs be subject, and not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause, here it is, pay ye tribute also. For they're God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues. There's something that the government has due. I don't like paying taxes probably any more than you do, but I know there's government services, and we pay for government services, particularly their protection. That's one of the reasons the government is ordained, to protect us. And so we pay what's due, don't we? Render therefore all their dues. Tribute to whom tribute is due. Custom to whom custom. Fear to whom fear. Honor to whom honor. Here's what he says in Timothy. 1 Timothy 2, 1 through 3. I exhort therefore that first of all supplications, prayers, and intercession, and giving of thanks be made for all men. And when you're talking about thanking God for men, here's what he says. For kings. And for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty, for this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior. We thank God for our rulers. We thank God for those kings, for our governments. 1 Peter 2, 13 through 17. Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors, or to them that are sent by him, for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. For so is the will of God, that with well-doing ye may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, not using your liberty as a cloak of maliciousness, but as the servants of God. Honor all men. Love the brotherhood. Fear God, honor the king. Well, what does the Lord expect out of us? Here we are, we're Christians. We're part of the kingdom of heaven. We are citizens of heaven, the Bible says. What's to be expected out of those who are in God's spiritual kingdom? I'll tell you what the Lord expects. He expects us to be exemplary citizens in our earthly governments. That's what He expects. It's not, Christianity is not anti-government. Christianity is not some kind of secret, subtle, hypocritical, subversive thing trying to undermine the rule of government and law. Now, governments can get out of hand, that's true. In fact, the government authorities even put Christ on the cross. Now, you know God does not approve of that. But when government operates within the realm wherein God has had it to operate, we are to be thankful and compliant and exemplary citizens of a government as it is doing that. Daniel is a good Old Testament example. He's a government official. And there were others in the government that were jealous of Daniel. Presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. That's their kingdom, the Babylonian kingdom. But they could find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful. What's he faithful to? He's faithful to the king. Neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, we shall not find occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. What they say about Daniel is what they ought to be able to say about us. People are looking for occasion against us. It ought not be because we have failed somewhere in our citizenship, that we're not paying our taxes, that we're not rendering honor to whose honor and due to whom due, and that we're not following and compliant and exemplary citizens of our government. If they're going to find occasion against us, it's going to be because we're going to follow God's law. And then just like these, see, they passed laws to try to get Daniel to keep from doing what God said, and Daniel stayed right with God. But that's when they had abused the power. The use of the power the Lord supports. So when they heard these things, they marveled and left him and went their way. Well, we ought to marvel too. Look how Jesus conducted himself in that. Look at the elevated teaching that he brought, the clarity of thought that he brought to this situation. The way that he had to answer those critics, saw right into their hearts. I tell you what, there was never a man spake like this man. This is the Christ, the Son of God. And that's why Matthew recorded this. Yeah, we learned some lessons. But the main lesson we learn is that Jesus is the Christ. And Jesus is the Christ. Jesus is our King. And if we're going to render unto God the things that are God's, then what do we owe our Creator, God, that made us and died for us? It demands our all. And he says if you want to see the kingdom of heaven, you need to be born of water and of the Spirit. And so be baptized into water, come up out of that water as a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. And then conduct your life in a manner that brings him honor. If you haven't done that, you have an opportunity to do it while we sing the invitation song.